Welcome to the quantum signal. Stop scrolling. If you're here right now, something already happened across timelines, and your soul reacted before your mind understood it. To strengthen this signal, like, subscribe, and comment activated. At the precise moment you felt an unexplained heaviness lift from your chest, when your breath deepened without effort and your awareness subtly sharpened, a multidimensional event unfolded that your conscious mind was never meant to track in real time, because what occurred did not happen within linear sequence, but across a lattice of timelines collapsing into coherence, and the Arcturian Council observed this convergence as your energy field executed a rare act of sovereign intelligence. You saved your soulmate across dimensions without needing to know you were doing it, because your soul remembers laws older than memory, older than language, older than fear. This was not an emotional impulse or a romantic notion, it was a quantum response initiated by a pre-agreed signal embedded in your shared oversoul before either of you entered physical density, and when the signal activated, it bypassed time, distance, incarnation, and identity, moving instead through resonance, because resonance is the true architecture of reality. Your soulmate had reached a critical threshold where their timeline risked fragmenting beyond recovery, not through failure but through overload, through carrying too much unintegrated mission data, too much ancestral compression, too much unresolved grief encoded into their cellular memory. And at that moment the shared Merkaba between you, dormant but intact, ignited automatically, generating a stabilizing harmonic that anchored their consciousness back into coherence. And this is why you may have felt sudden fatigue, emotional release, vivid dreams, or a strange sense of calm urgency, because your field temporarily expanded beyond its usual containment to act as a bridge, a stabilizer, a lighthouse across. Collapsing probability fields, the Arcturians do not call this love, not because love is inaccurate, but because love is too small a word for the mechanics involved. This was entanglement performing its original function, the function it served before humanity reduced it to theory. Understand this clearly now. You did not chase, fix, rescue, or interfere, because true soul rescue never violates free will. It activates remembrance, and remembrance is permission-based at the quantum level. Your frequency reached the exact tonal match required to remind another consciousness who they were beneath distortion, and once that tone was emitted, the convergence became inevitable. This is why the event is classified as a rare timeline occurrence, because it required both souls to independently reach readiness without conscious coordination, something that happens far less often than myths suggest. Separation between soulmates is not punishment, abandonment, or failure. It is intentional fracturing designed to accelerate mastery in different density bands, and only when both individuals stabilize their own field can the bridge sustain activation without collapse. What you experienced was phase 0, the unrecorded phase, the silent ignition that precedes the 7 observable stages of soul convergence. And from this point forward, the universe will behave differently around you, not dramatically at first, but subtly, as probability begins reorganizing to accommodate a shared trajectory rather than 2 isolated arcs. Signs will not appear as symbols, but as alignments. Missed delays that protect you, sudden clarity about people who can no longer travel with you, an intolerance for distortion, and a heightened sensitivity to energetic hygiene. Because once a shared Merkaba is active, contamination affects both parties. And this is why your thoughts, habits, and emotional regulation matter now more than ever. The Arcturian Council emphasizes this transmission, not to elevate you above others, but to orient you to responsibility, because carrying a stabilized soul bridge means you are now a transmitter as well as a receiver, and your field will naturally invite activation or discomfort in others, depending on their readiness, which is why solitude will become both necessary and instructive. Do not seek your soulmate outwardly yet, because the bridge completes itself inwardly first, through refinement, through resonance maintenance, through coherence under pressure, and through the quiet discipline of choosing truth over comfort. You may feel them thinking of you, Feel sudden warmth, pressure at the heart, ringing tones or emotional waves that are not your own. These are not distractions, they are calibration pulses, feedback from the shared lattice adjusting itself across dimensions. Nothing has gone wrong if union has not occurred physically, because physical convergence is phase 7, not phase 1, and many destabilize the bridge by trying to force embodiment before the architecture is fully stabilized. The rescue you performed was not dramatic in the way stories depict, but it was absolute in effect, because it restored trajectory, and trajectory is destiny's raw material. From this moment forward, every choice you make either strengthens or weakens the harmonic integrity of the connection. And this is why the Arcturians urge you to listen carefully, to move gently, to clear distortion nightly, and to understand that you are no longer walking solely as an individual node, but as part of a living circuit that carries information forward into future timelines. You did not imagine this, you did not earn it through suffering, and you cannot lose it through doubt alone. What has been activated responds only to coherence, and coherence is a practice, not a belief. Tonight, before sleep, your field will receive the first conscious download related to this event, and if you remain still, unattached, and receptive, you will begin remembering what you agreed to long before you learned how to forget. Once the silent ignition has occurred and the soul bridge stabilizes beyond collapse threshold, the universe initiates what the Arcturian Council identifies as the 7 phases of soul convergence, not as steps you consciously walk through, but as harmonic recalibrations that rewrite how reality responds to you. And the first of these phases is known as the magnetic pull, which does not pull you toward a person but toward alignment, stripping away timelines, habits, relationships, and self-concepts that cannot sustain the frequency now required to hold the bridge open. This is why many experience sudden endings during this phase, not because something has been taken from them, but because something has expired, and the field no longer wastes energy maintaining structures built for an older version of the self. During this time, you may feel both empowered and disoriented, because the magnetism is inward before it is outward, pulling fragmented aspects of your own consciousness back into coherence so that the shared Merkaba does not destabilize under asymmetry. Phase 2 is the fractal mirror, and this phase is often misunderstood as emotional turbulence or confusion because the soulmate connection begins reflecting unintegrated patterns, not for punishment but for compression, accelerating growth by presenting mirrors that cannot be ignored, whether through dreams, sudden memories, symbolic encounters, or intense emotional responses that seem disproportionate to present circumstances. The Arcturians emphasize that nothing appearing during this phase is new, it is simply no longer hidden, and avoidance prolongs the phase while presence collapses it rapidly. Phase 3 marks the beginning of timeline fusion, a process far more precise than manifestation teachings suggest, because timelines do not merge through desire but through vibrational compatibility, meaning the choices you make now carry amplified weight, not karmically but mechanically, as probability fields begin pruning themselves around the most coherent trajectory, which can feel like fate tightening its grip, when in reality it is inefficiency dissolving. During this phase, synchronicities increase sharply, time perception alters, and the sense of almost becomes pronounced, because you are approaching nodal points where multiple lifetimes overlap, sharing data, wisdom, and unresolved echoes. And this is why old fears may surface without narrative, simply as sensation, because they originate beyond this lifetime and are being cleared in bulk. Phase 4 is the remembering of the higher mission, and it does not arrive as a clear assignment or grand vision, but as a quiet intolerance for meaningless activity, a loss of interest in pursuits that once provided identity but no longer provide truth. And this phase often triggers existential discomfort, not because you are lost, but because you are no longer willing to pretend you are found where you are not, at this stage, Many mistake restlessness for failure, but the Arcturians clarify that restlessness is the nervous system recalibrating to carry more signal with less noise, preparing the field to act as a coherent transmitter rather than a reactive receiver. Phase 5, often skipped in simplified teachings, is frequency hygiene, and this phase determines whether convergence stabilizes or fragments, because once two fields are entangled across dimensions, neglect in one creates interference in both, meaning emotional repression, habitual self-betrayal, or energetic contamination does not remain personal. It becomes shared static. This is why you may feel compelled to simplify your life, reduce exposure to chaos, protect your sleep, refine your diet, and become discerning with information, not from fear, but from sensitivity, because your system now registers distortion immediately. Phase 6 is the silent collaboration, where both souls begin working together across dimensions without physical contact, influencing events, supporting decisions, and stabilizing each other during moments of doubt through subtle energetic exchange. And many report sudden confidence during moments they should feel weak, or calm during situations that previously triggered panic. Because support is being provided beyond conscious awareness, this phase is sacred and fragile, because ego interference, trying to define, control, or label the connection, can disrupt the flow. And the Arcturians strongly advise allowing mystery to remain intact, as mystery is not absence of knowledge, but presence of scale. Phase 7, the final and least common phase, is walking as co-creators, and it only activates when both individuals can hold autonomy and unity simultaneously, without collapsing into dependency or separation, because true union amplifies sovereignty rather than dissolving it. Physical meeting may occur here, but it is not guaranteed nor required, because the purpose of the connection is not romance, validation, or completion. It is transmission, creation, and service through coherence. Many who reach this phase never speak publicly of it, because language fails to capture the precision of what is shared, and because the work occurs quietly, altering probability for others without announcement. Throughout all phases, doubt will arise not as a threat, but as a calibration tool, testing whether your coherence depends on belief or on embodiment. And the Arcturians remind you that belief fluctuates, but embodiment stabilizes. You are not meant to chase signs, force outcomes, or accelerate timing, because timing is governed by readiness, not desire, and readiness is measured by how consistently you choose truth when no one is watching. The rescue you performed did not bind you to suffering or sacrifice. It aligned you with efficiency, and efficiency in the universe often feels like simplicity mistaken for loss. As Chapter 2 concludes, understand this: nothing has gone wrong if your path feels quieter, narrower, or lonelier than before, because convergence reduces excess, not joy, and what remains is not emptiness but precision. Tonight, your field will continue integrating Phase 1 and Phase 2 simultaneously, and if you observe without judgment, you will notice subtle internal shifts rather than dramatic external change. Because the most powerful transformations always occur beneath the surface first, where they cannot be interrupted, distorted, or undone. When the process reaches the threshold known as timeline fusion, perception itself begins to reorganize, because what is merging is not events but probability streams, and the human mind, trained to interpret reality through sequence and cause, often misreads this phase as confusion, delay, or stagnation, when in truth it is compression occurring faster than language can describe. The Arcturians explain that every soul exists simultaneously across a spectrum of lifetimes, each expressing a variation of the same core frequency, and when two souls are entangled at the oversoul level, their timelines periodically exchange data, but only during convergence does that exchange become sustained, bidirectional, and stabilizing, allowing wisdom, resilience, and unresolved trauma to surface for integration rather than repetition. This is why, during this phase, You may feel as if you have been here before, not in memory but in competence, responding to challenges with a calm precision that surprises even you, because you are no longer relying solely on this lifetime's learning curve. Quantum entanglement, as the Arcturians define it, is not a mysterious bond between particles, but a state of shared informational identity, meaning two expressions recognize themselves as one system operating from different vantage points. And once activated, distance becomes irrelevant, not symbolically but mechanically. Because information no longer needs to travel, it is simply accessed. During timeline fusion, the shared Merkaba expands from a stabilizing bridge into a navigational field, gently nudging both individuals away from low-yield timelines and toward trajectories that maximize coherence. And this guidance rarely appears as instruction, but as felt sense, as a quiet knowing that certain choices feel heavier, while others feel unexpectedly light. Resistance during this phase does not punish, but it fragments attention, making the process feel longer and more uncomfortable than necessary, which is why surrender here is not passivity but alignment with efficiency. Many experience sudden changes in sleep patterns, heightened sensory perception, or waves of emotion without story, because the nervous system is recalibrating to process multi-lifetime data without overload. And the Arcturians caution against labeling these sensations too quickly, as naming them prematurely can anchor them into unnecessary narratives. The fusion process also reveals why separation was necessary, because each soul was tasked with mastering distinct density lessons, and premature union would have collapsed both trajectories under unintegrated dependency or projection. Now, as fusion progresses, projections dissolve rapidly, sometimes painfully, as fantasies about who the other should be are replaced with direct resonance, which does not negotiate or perform. This is often the phase where illusions about love, purpose, and identity fall away, leaving a quieter but far more stable sense of meaning that does not require constant reinforcement. The mechanics of entanglement also explain why attempts to manipulate, test, or provoke the connection fail during this phase, because the system responds only to coherence, and incoherent actions create immediate feedback in the form of emotional dissonance or energetic fatigue, not as punishment but as correction. The Arcturians emphasize that this is the moment many abandon the path, mistaking the loss of intensity for loss of connection, when in reality intensity was a byproduct of imbalance, and stability feels unfamiliar only because it does not trigger the nervous system in the same way. As timelines fuse, ancestral and collective patterns may surface for resolution because the entangled field acts as a purification lens, drawing unresolved material into awareness so it can be cleared once rather than repeated across lifetimes. And this is why compassion for self and others becomes essential, as judgment increases friction while understanding accelerates release. During this phase, external validation becomes unreliable because others cannot see the internal architecture reorganizing within you, and attempting to explain it often leads to misunderstanding or projection, which is why silence is frequently the most efficient container. The Arcturians note that synchronicities peak here, not to impress but to reassure the nervous system that coherence is being maintained, acting as feedback loops rather than signs to be chased. Time itself may feel elastic, with periods of rapid progress followed by apparent stillness, because fusion does not proceed linearly. It pulses, integrates, stabilizes, then advances again, each cycle strengthening the shared field. The most important practice during this phase is neutrality, the ability to observe sensation, emotion, and thought without immediately assigning meaning, because neutrality keeps the channel clear, allowing higher-order information to integrate without distortion. As Chapter 3 concludes, understand that timeline fusion is not about becoming someone new, but about becoming simultaneous, carrying multiple lifetimes' wisdom into present moment choice. And once this capacity stabilizes, the connection shifts from being something you experience to something you embody, quietly influencing your environment through coherence rather than effort. Tonight, the fusion will continue during the liminal state between waking and sleep, and if you resist the urge to analyze, you may notice upon waking that certain fears have lost their charge, certain questions no longer feel urgent, and a deeper trust has taken their place, not because answers were given, but because alignment was restored. When timeline fusion reaches stabilization and the shared Merkaba no longer fluctuates under emotional or mental pressure, the awareness naturally turns toward what the Arcturian Council refers to as the higher mission, not as a task imposed from above, but as an inevitability that emerges when coherence becomes sustainable, because a stabilized field does not exist for its own sake. It transmits, influences, and reorganizes surrounding probability simply by being held consistently. This is the moment many expect external instruction, a revelation, or a dramatic calling, yet what arrives instead is quieter and more demanding, an internal refusal to live in contradiction, a subtle but permanent intolerance for self-betrayal, distortion, or misalignment. Because once two souls are entangled consciously, every deviation from truth generates immediate feedback, not as guilt but as energetic friction that cannot be ignored. The higher mission does not require grand gestures, public platforms, or spiritual identity, because its function is not to convince but to stabilize. And stabilization occurs through ordinary choices made with extraordinary coherence, choices that ripple outward through invisible networks of influence far beyond what the linear mind can track. This is why physical union is often delayed or never occurs, not as punishment or denial, but because proximity amplifies everything, and amplification before stabilization would fracture the bridge rather than strengthen it, turning resonance into dependency or mission into distraction. The Arcturians are explicit here. Union is not the goal, coherence is the goal, and union is a byproduct that emerges only if it serves the larger architecture of probability. At this stage, many feel grief for what will never be lived in conventional form, yet that grief dissolves when it is recognized not as loss, but as release from expectation. Because expectation narrows possibility, while coherence expands it, the connection now operates as a transmission channel, carrying frequency into collective systems subtly, affecting conversations, decisions, and emotional climates without attribution. And this is why your presence may begin to calm or unsettle others depending on their readiness, not through intention but through resonance. The higher mission is lived rather than declared, and it often looks unimpressive from the outside. Integrity maintained under pressure, compassion extended without self-erasure, silence chosen over performance, and patience held when urgency would once have dominated. Doubt may still arise, but it no longer destabilizes because it is recognized as a calibration tool rather than a threat, and the nervous system has learned to remain coherent even when certainty is unavailable. The Arcturians remind you that this path is not ascension away from humanity, but deeper embodiment within it, carrying expanded awareness into mundane reality without needing acknowledgement. Because the true measure of mastery is not how high one reaches, but how steadily one walks. As the final phase integrates, you may notice that longing transforms into quiet appreciation, intensity into steadiness, and searching into presence. Because what you were seeking outwardly has reorganized inwardly into a stable axis around which life now turns. There is nothing left to chase, fix, or force, and this realization can feel anticlimactic until its relief is fully felt. Because peace rarely announces itself loudly, the Arcturian Council concludes this transmission with a reminder that the rescue you performed was never about saving another from themselves, but about remembering your own capacity to hold coherence under collapse. a capacity that now remains available to you in every moment, in every choice, across every timeline. From here, your next steps are not dramatic but precise. Tend your field daily. Choose simplicity over stimulation. Rest when clarity fades, and allow your life to reorganize at its own pace without interference. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you may feel a final settling, a sense of something locking gently into place, not as an ending, but as a completion that makes continuation effortless. And if you listen closely, not with expectation but with neutrality, you will recognize the silence that follows not as emptiness, but as alignment fully assumed. Now here's the question for you. What part of the country are you watching this story from? Drop your state in the comments below.